The 1970s were a strange, beautiful, and contradictory decade for British motoring. Fuel crises hit hard, regulations tightened their grip, and yet somehow, Britain kept building roadsters that made your heart race and your palms sweat. Open tops, rear-wheel drive, engines that genuinely sang. These cars weren't just transportation, they were a statement, a rebellion against the ordinary. And somewhere on this list sits one car so pure, so perfectly balanced, that enthusiasts still quietly call it magic. Today we're counting down 10 British roadsters that truly defined the 1970s, and trust us, you'll want to stay until the very end. Number 10. Triumph TR6. We start where the decade started, with a car that had already earned its reputation and wasn't done yet. The Triumph TR6 rolled into the 1970s carrying serious street credibility. Launched in 1969 and styled by Carman of Germany, it carried a 2.5-litre straight-six engine that produced a genuine growl you could feel deep in your chest on every single acceleration. The long bonnet, the chopped tail, the wide-set chrome bumpers, this was roadster design with real muscle behind it. But here's what most people miss about the TR6, it wasn't just a pretty machine. It was genuinely fast for its era, hitting 60 in under 9 seconds. American buyers absolutely loved it. In fact, the US took the vast majority of every TR6 ever built. Only real enthusiasts noticed that the UK spec version produced considerably more power. Would you have chosen the British version? Because that difference was remarkable. Number 9. MGB Roadster. From the TR6, we move to a car that was arguably even more beloved by the British public, the iconic MGB Roadster. If the TR6 was about power and presence, the MGB was purely about accessibility and charm. It had been around since 1962, but the 1970s were when it truly became a fixture of everyday British culture. You'd see them at weekend rallies, parked outside country pubs, and driven hard along winding coastal roads. But here's what most people overlook, the MGB changed dramatically across the decade, and not always for the better. The introduction of those ungainly rubber bumpers in 1974, forced by American safety legislation, genuinely hurt its soul. Yet somehow the MGB survived, adapted, and held onto its fan base through sheer character and reliability. The 1.8-litre B-Series engine was never exotic, but it was honest and willing. And sometimes, that's exactly what a driver truly needs. Number 8. TVR 2500M. And this is where things get genuinely interesting. Not every 1970s British roadster had a famous badge or a global fan base. Some were built by small, passionate companies in cold British workshops, and the TVR 2500M is one of the finest and most overlooked examples. TVR, built in Blackpool of all places, offered something quite different from the mainstream. The 2500M used a Triumph TR6 engine, yes, the very same one from car number 10, but shoved it into a lightweight fiberglass body that transformed the driving experience entirely. The result was savage, raw, and brilliantly unpredictable. Hardly anyone talks about this car today, and that is a genuine crime against automotive history. The 2500M handled with wild aggression, its rear end stepping out on demand, and its cockpit felt uncomfortably intimate. This wasn't a car for the faint-hearted. But for those who truly understood it, it was absolutely intoxicating. Number 7. Jensen Healey. Moving on, and here's a car that divided opinion sharply when it arrived in 1972, the Jensen Healey. The story behind this roadster is genuinely fascinating. Jensen Motors, a company better known for luxury grand tourers, partnered with Donald Healey, the legendary mind behind the Austin Healey, to create a proper open-top sports car. On paper, it sounded ideal. And this is where things get complicated. The Lotus 907 engine fitted to early cars gained a reputation for unreliability that Jensen could not afford to ignore. But here's what most people miss. The later, revised versions were significantly improved and genuinely exciting to drive. A twin-cam engine, a tight cockpit, and a revvy character that rewarded enthusiastic driving. The Jensen Healey never quite achieved the success it deserved, and Jensen itself collapsed in 1976. But the car it left behind was something truly rare, a brief, brilliant, genuinely passionate piece of British engineering. Number 6. Triumph Spitfire 1500. Now, if accessibility and affordability were the name of the game, then one car stood above almost everything else on this list, the Triumph Spitfire. By the time the 1500 variant arrived in 1974, it had grown into one of the most popular sports cars Britain had ever produced for everyday buyers. Small, light, and with a face that could genuinely make you smile before you even turned the key. But here's what most people miss about the Spitfire: it had a swing-axle rear suspension layout that could bite hard on fast corners if you weren't careful. Only real enthusiasts know just how sideways a Spitfire could get when pushed past its limit. And yet, this didn't stop thousands of young drivers from falling completely in love with it. The Spitfire represented freedom at an affordable price. And in the financially difficult 1970s, that mattered more than almost anything else. Number 5. Lotus Europa Special. We're halfway through now, and the cars only get more compelling from here. Stay with us, because what's coming in the top 4 will genuinely surprise you. But first, a car that redefined what a mid-engine British roadster could be, the Lotus Europa Special. Lotus under Colin Chapman was always obsessed with one thing above everything else: lightness. The Europa embodied that philosophy completely. Wedge-shaped, almost impossibly low to the ground, and powered by a twin-cam engine in its later special form that produced a genuinely thrilling driving experience. But here's what most people overlook: the Europa's chassis was so stiff and its handling so precise that professional racing drivers used it as a benchmark. Driving one on a winding B road felt less like driving and more like being aimed. It demanded your full concentration. And this is where things change: it rewarded you completely for giving it exactly that. Number 4. Morgan Plus 8. From cutting-edge aerodynamics to something that looked almost deliberately old-fashioned. But don't let that fool you. The Morgan Plus 8 is one of those cars that exists entirely on its own terms, and in the 1970s, it was producing an experience that most modern sports cars still cannot replicate. Morgan, the family company in Malvern, had been building handcrafted cars for decades. But when they dropped a Rover 3.5-litre V8 engine into their slender Ashwood-framed body in 1968, they created something genuinely extraordinary. By the 1970s, the Plus 8 was fully refined and utterly addictive. The torque from that V8 was almost violent. The steering was direct and full of honest feedback. Hardly anyone outside the enthusiast community understood why someone would choose this over a modern car. But those who drove one never asked that question again. Would you actually pick this one today? Because honestly, you probably should. Number 3. Jaguar E-Type Series 3. We're entering the top 3 now, and if you've made it this far, you already know you're exactly in the right place. Number 3 on this list is one of the most visually stunning cars ever built on British soil, the Jaguar E-Type Series 3. Launched in 1971, it carried the legendary E-Type into a new decade with a remarkable 5.3-litre V12 engine that completely redefined what a Jaguar could feel and sound like. The exhaust note alone was extraordinary, a low, refined, impossibly smooth wail that made people stop and stare from 20 meters away. And this is where things change. The Series 3 was larger, more comfortable, and faster than almost anything money could buy. Enzo Ferrari himself had once called the E-Type the most beautiful car ever made. The Series 3 made sure that title was never questioned. Do you see why this car still matters today? Number 2. Triumph TR7. Number 2 brings us somewhere unexpected, and we want you to hear us out before you make up your mind. The Triumph TR7 arrived in 1975 carrying a design language that shocked nearly everyone who saw it. The wedge shape, the sharp angles, the pop-up headlights, this was a British sports car that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd watched too many American sci-fi films. And it sounds ideal, right? Modern styling, new direction, fresh start. Not entirely. The TR7 was initially only available as a coupe, and strike action at the Speak factory disrupted production badly. But here's what most people miss. The convertible TR7 that arrived in 1979 was genuinely transformative. With the roof gone and the wind in your face, the TR7 found its true identity. It was bold, different, and unapologetic. And in a decade desperate for something new, that counted for everything. Number 1. Caterham 7. And here we are. Number 1. The car that enthusiasts, journalists, and racing drivers have consistently called one of the purest driving experiences ever created, the Caterham 7. When Lotus sold the 7 designed to Caterham cars in 1973, most people assumed a small chapter of British motoring history had quietly closed. They were absolutely wrong. Caterham didn't just continue the 7, they perfected it. Through the 1970s, the Caterham 7 evolved into something impossibly focused. No roof. No creature comforts. No unnecessary weight. Just a tiny space frame chassis, 4 wheels, an engine, and you. The connection between driver and road was unlike anything else on this list, or anything built anywhere in the world. You felt every surface, every input, every fraction of grip. It wasn't just driving. It was communication. Pure, unfiltered, two-way conversation between human and machine. That, Britain Rewind, is truly what pure magic feels like. The 1970s weren't a perfect decade for British motoring. Far from it. But the cars it produced, from the muscular TR6 to the pure brilliance of the Caterham 7, tell a story of passion that refused to die quietly. These weren't just machines. They were escape routes from an era defined by strikes, uncertainty, and change. And that emotional connection is why we still talk about them today, decades later. If you enjoyed this journey through Britain's finest roadsters, hit like, subscribe to Britain Rewind, and tell us in the comments, which one would you have parked in your garage? We read every single comment.